G'day, rock stars. Hope this finds you just terrific. It's Harps, of course it is. Who else would it be? Maybe one day it'll be somebody not me at the helm. That'd be interesting. I wonder how that would go. Could be awesome. Anyway, it's the U Project. Now, recently I sat down with Mark LeBusque from the Simply Practically Human podcast, and he and I waxed lyricals about all things mindset, human performance, high performance, being awesome, having fun, being a typical human, peaks and troughs, all the stuff we do. It was a good chat. He's a good dude. Take a listen.
Hey there, it's Mark LeBusque for the Simply Practically Human podcast. A little bit of self-disclosure or holding the mirror up here before I introduce today's guest. I often talk to people about the ability to look back into your mirror, and the other thing is to stop bloody comparing yourself or comparing myself to other people. And it was such a challenge for me today because my guest, Craig Harper, who is the creator of, among many things, author, speaker, very, very successful entrepreneur. But one other thing he does exceptionally well, he has an amazing podcast called The U Project, which he records every day and has, I think, around about 10,000 listeners per day now. So incredible. And here I am with my 40-odd, 50-odd listeners per day, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm about to interview someone who is doing this so much better than what I am. But then I sort of thought to myself, well, what's better? And I was a bit like a excited little kid early on. My voice might sound like it's going at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but it was just such a delight to get Craig on today and to start to eat a bit of my own dog food, which is don't compare yourself to others, even though we tend to do that because that's sort of the way we're wired, and just let things go where they go to. So don't go too much off script. Let's have a conversation and see where we go. And I am absolutely delighted to have Craig on here today. He is someone that calls things as he sees them. He has a unique ability to work on helping people to be better, but he does a lot of that work with himself to start. His belief about starting with self will come through in today's episode. He shared some amazing things. There were some real similarities for us along the way. I, as you know, I like to find some common as we go, and some common things were worked out in some research that I did just so I was prepared, but there was also some commonalities that came up just because two human beings decided to get on a Zoom call and have a conversation for an hour. And I think there's always a lesson in that the more that we speak to each other, the more that we're prepared to listen, the more that we understand about each other, so too is the deeper connection that we can build. I don't want to really give too much away about today because I'll talk about it a bit at the end of the episode, but I was fascinated by Craig's ability to go to places that I wouldn't have thought we would ever gone to, his openness to share stories about himself, and particularly on how he talked about the fact that a lot of the times he just doesn't know what the bloody hell he's doing, but he continues to front up every day and do the work he does, which is benefiting people all around the world now. And he shares quite a funny story about a chat that he did just this week, which I think you'll really enjoy. One of the other things that you might notice with today's podcast is, because we've kept it so real, you might notice that there'll be some expletives in there as well. So this is just a bit of a non-spoiler alert for when that stuff comes up, that you may hear some words that I think you may have heard before, but some people may get offended by them and some people may not. But I think they're in there because it was just two human beings having a pretty open conversation. Just thought I'd let you know that. So sit back, have a listen, take some notes, really worth it. Get yourself a drink or whatever you want to do, and we'll catch you at the back end. Cheers. I'm delighted today to be joined by podcaster, speaker, author, truth teller, bullshit buster, and all-round good human, Craig Harper. Craig, thanks for joining me, mate.
Hey, mate, that's a nice intro. Sometimes not just bullshit buster, sometimes bullshitter, you know. So It's a fine line sometimes.
Mate, I've got the sense after listening to your podcast, the U Project, that you actually call out your own bullshit at times, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, there's nobody that's harder on me than me. So I think as long as you're constructive with it and not destructive, constructive, not destructive, and self-aware, not self-loathing, I think it's a good part of the personal development process is to not take yourself too seriously and not think you're too good.
I love it. Hey, I usually start with where we connected, but I've got a little story about that. My daughter Zoe, my youngest daughter, her boyfriend Tom came to one of your seminars, and he came back home and he said, "Mate, you've got to follow this guy." And so I started to do that, and I let Tommy know that you were going to be on here, and he asked me if I could ask you a question. And he also said this. He also told me an answer that you're not allowed to give. So I thought that was pretty forward of him. So the question was, what sparks your level of critical thinking, Craig? And he said that you can't say curiosity as the answer.
Oh, wow. He knows me quite well. I think that we don't think enough. Let me restate that. We have 70 or so thousand thoughts a day, but 95% of those thoughts we had yesterday, depends on which data you look at. But we think a lot, but it's thinking critically that is the key. And by critically, we don't mean negatively. We mean thoughtfully, and in a way we're kind of trying to become more aware of the way that we process the world around us. So metacognition is thinking about thinking. I'm fascinated with how I think. I'm fascinated with how you think. I'm fascinated that you can have 1,000 people or more listen to our conversation, and 1,000 people will have 1,000 different experiences despite having the exact same stimulus, which is two blokes talking, right?
Yep.
That fascinates me, that we create our own reality. And the way that we create our own reality via that kind of cognitive process of interpreting an external stimulus, taking it in, telling ourselves a story about it, and then that becomes our version of what is real. That stuff is mind-blowing to me, because we're subjective creatures living in an essentially an objective world.
Yep. So there you go, Tommy. There's the answer, mate. He didn't go for curiosity, and he explained that a bit further. Let's dig in a little bit to that up to 70,000 thoughts a day, because this does fascinate me too. And from some of the research I've read, about 70% of those thoughts are not necessarily great ones. They're usually to the negative, because we're a survival species. I tend to talk to people about these two filing cabinets we have in our head, this sort of 7-drawer one full of shitty stuff that keeps bouncing at us, and then the sort of 3-drawer one with some better stories. I've heard you say at times that we are not our minds, but I'm wondering, how do you manage if those filing cabinets are in your head, mate? How do you manage your mind?
Well, I think a thought is essentially a self-created cerebral construct. I'm sorry, that sounds too fucking fancy, doesn't it? I mean, but a thought is, what is it? It's just a theoretical something. Now, because it's a thought doesn't mean it's real, right?
Yep.
I might think, this is going terribly. Mark's hating my guts. This is a train wreck. Nobody's going to like this. That's what I'm thinking. But that might not be, let's hope it's not the reality. But if I believe it's the reality, then that becomes my experience. And not only does that become my mental experience, but then it becomes my emotional, fear, anxiety experience. Then it becomes my biological, heart rate, adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine, sympathetic nervous system, blood pressure, blah, blah, blah. Now I am in a lived experience because I told myself, or I had a thought that was negative. I told myself a story that was negative, despite the objective truth being, Mark likes me, we're going okay, this is kind of interesting, people are a bit engaged. And it's being able to be aware of our thoughts. Like, I have some weird thoughts. I can simultaneously get on a stage in front of 1,000 people, feel like a fraud, or have a thought that I'm a fraud, I'm not good enough.
Yep.
This is the day that I'm going to be caught out, right? And even have emotions attached to that, while simultaneously knowing, having data, having evidence that that's not true, Craig, because you've done this many times. And you've even done it for this company and they've paid you to come back. So we know that those kind of irrational negative thoughts can coexist with actual knowledge.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be like, if I waited until I had no irrational thoughts or fears or self-limiting thinking or self-sabotaging kind of habits, I'd never do a podcast. I'd never do a presentation. I'd never write a book, because the human experience is not to be devoid of those things, but rather to happily coexist with them.
I love that idea that we actually need to sit with a bit of that fear. I think it's really important. I what I call comfortably uncomfortable, in order to do a podcast and whatever else it might be. Hey, I always like to try and find some connection, and having listened to a recent podcast of yours, I found a pretty absurd connection between us two. A TV show called 8 out of 10 Cats Does Countdown.
Best show ever. You're welcome.
I actually love it as well. What is it about that show that appeals to you?
For me, it's a mix of inappropriate dialogue, stupid humour, and I love that there's a cognitive component where I can be solving puzzles, which I love doing, in the middle of laughing my ass off. For me, it's like if I invented a TV show, that would be what I invented, but I'm not that clever. But if I could have been that clever, I would have invented that. But it's also one of those shows, I would imagine, that polarizes people. Like, I'm sure I've told people to watch it and who actually hate it. And then other people who are like, dude, how did I not know this was in existence? So each to his own, I guess.
Yeah, interesting. We might get into polarization later on as well. Just something else I noticed. Now, I've heard you say you grew up in the country. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. In Latrobe Valley.
In the Latrobe Valley. Okay. Would love to get a little bit of your backstory, because one of the things I love the listeners to pick up on is, let's hear about the human being as well before we sort of get into some sort of pretty weird shit. I reckon we might. So give us a bit of your backstory, Craig, about where you grew up and sort of what influenced you to get to where you are today.
Okay, I'll give you the kind of brief. Born in Ballarat, left there when I was 2, went and lived in Latrobe Valley, lived there till I was about 7. Parents moved to Tasmania, moved back to Latrobe Valley at about 10 and lived there from then on. So I kind of say I'm from there because I did most of my between 0 and 18 years of life there. Fat kid, fattest kid in my school, unathletic, not particularly brilliant, mildly popular, as in fitted in. It wasn't a horrible experience. I had mates, but my name was Jumbo at school. So no one called me Craig, everyone, including believe it or not, the teachers and parents. Not all the teachers, most called me Jumbo. Sports coaches call me Jumbo. And I had a bit of an epiphany, I guess, at about 14, which for me, the epiphany came at the year 8 swimming sports where I was literally manhandled out to the starting blocks because I was always capable or able to avoid the starter's gun in the previous years of swimming sports. So I didn't, when you're morbidly obese, I mean, I'm 5'10"-ish now, and I was probably 5'6" or 7. And today I don't know what I weigh, but about 84. But then I was probably closer to 94 as a 14, so I was fat. And the one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to take off your T-shirt. You definitely don't want to do that anywhere. Maybe the sanctuary of your bedroom, maybe. But other than that, you definitely don't want to do it in public for the obvious reasons. And so I had to do that. And, I don't blame anyone for that. That was my own doing. I just ate what I shouldn't have eaten. But, so I had a moment in time. And for me, that was really Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called The Tipping Point. And for me, which is not actually about what I'm talking about, but I just love that term, the tipping point. And for me, it was like an emotional and psychological tipping point where I went, oh, well, this is never going to happen again. I'm never going to allow myself to experience this again because of my own stupidity, laziness, greed, whatever. So I went home, and that night was the first time in my life. So I was 14 and whatever, a month or 3 or something. And I went for a run. And when I say I went for a run, I went for a walk with a few little intervals of jogging. But that was the genesis, And what happened over the next 4 months was I lost 30-something kilos, and I went down to about 60, and I went from being wildly unfit to relatively Olympian relative to where I started, and it was just for me, mate, it was a really, of course, it's a big physiological shift, but what I loved, and I've seen this many times since as an exercise scientist and gym owner and trainer and all that, is the psychological and sociological and emotional shift was massive. And that was transformational more than, the physical's great, but it's the byproduct of the physical that is the real value. It's like people want to lose weight. That's a goal, sure. Okay. Or lose fat or whatever, or change their body in some way. That's cool. But then there's we always talk about the what and the why. Well, the why for me was I just never wanted to be humiliated, embarrassed again like that. That was my driver. It wasn't, and it was just the vehicle to that was to get myself a new body.
Yep. I love it. Interestingly, Jumbo's meeting Fatty on this podcast today because when I was a kid at Mildura High School, mate, my nickname was Fatty, and it still is today with my mates, 40-odd years on. They call me Fatty, and I don't think I'm as heavy as what I was back then like you. And their kids say, what the fuck are you calling him Fatty for? Because you're fatter than him. So
it's funny, isn't it?
But it's an interesting thing. And I can remember never doing swimming sports because I just didn't want to I didn't want to take the shirt up, but I was a shit swimmer anyway. And same thing, didn't want to get that humiliation. So you've sort of looked in the mirror back then. Mate, you've done a whole lot of other things too, though, since then. Author, podcaster, a whole lot of great things. What else have you been doing through that sort of time, those next few years?
So I started working in gyms when I was young, and that was essentially because I didn't want a real job. And I wasn't lazy, but the idea of normal jobs in inverted commas, whatever that meant, no disrespect to anyone in any job, but didn't appeal to me. And I was at the gym all the time because by then I was completely obsessed and lifting weights 37 times a week and running like a maniac and doing 1 million push-ups a day because I was unhinged. But I guess the idea of me working in a place where I wanted to spend time anyway and I was passionate about. So I started working in gyms as a gym instructor back in 82 when it was like nobody really knew what we were doing. There was very fundamental qualifications and, we're talking nearly 40 years ago. And then I was okay at it. And by the time I was 21, I was running gyms. And then by the time, I guess when I was 23-ish, so what was I, 63, 80, yeah, about 1986, a guy came into a gym that I was running and started talking to me and said, have you heard of personal trainers? Because he'd just come back from the States and had just kind of personal training, and it was just a new thing. So that's 35 years ago. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, I want a trainer. I'm like, well, there aren't any, and there were no PT studios or anything like that. Anyway, we started talking and I went, well, I'll train you if you want. And then so his name is Max, and he became my first ever personal and potentially the first personal training client in Australia.
Yep.
So I started him in 86, and of course people were coaching other people and all that. But in terms of, okay, this is a 3-time-a-week arrangement. I'm training someone who's not an elite athlete. It's a bloke who owns a company. It literally comes in his suit and gets changed, and I put him through his paces, and this is a personal training kind of process. So that was one, or if not one of the first, if not the first in Australia. And then that kind of just grew. And I started training a few of his friends, males and females, and I was still running the gym. And within 6 months, I was just overwhelmed with these people that wanted to do what Max was doing. And I'm like, well, maybe this is a thing. And the feedback I was getting from people was, well, that's great, but it's not going to last because people are not going to. And even back then, Mark, I think I was charging like $40 an hour, which was outrageous.
Yep.
Because I think as a gym instructor, I was getting 11 or 12. So I was the richest bloke in Hampton. I'm like, this is crazy. I'm Scrooge McDuck rich. This is crazy. So I was charging $40 an hour or something like that, which was, as I said, it was, I just thought people would come for a bit and then not, but they just kept coming. So I started thinking about setting up a standalone thing so I wouldn't have to train my clients in the middle of a stinky, sweaty gym at 6 o'clock on a Monday night with barbarians competing for benches and lat pulls and dumbbells. And over time, I conceptualized this thing that I opened in 1990, which was, to my knowledge, the first personal training centre in Australia. And it kind of just went from there. I had PT studios, 4 of them for 25 years. I employed 500 trainers, over 500 trainers. We did, hundreds of thousands of sessions over the years. And along the way, I went back to uni. Later, I went and did a degree in exercise science, became a university lecturer, started corporate speaking, did a bit of media, a lot of media actually, did about 20 years in the media, did about 12 years on SEN down here in Melbourne, which is Melbourne's home of sport all day, 11:16. That and, just lots of stuff, mate. But but what fascinated me was you get to the point where you work with bodies and you go, bodies are cool, and biceps and triceps and micros and macros and bums and legs and calories. It's interesting, but what's way more interesting is the person inside the body. And that started for me probably about 22 or 3, but I didn't know what to do with that.
Yep.
But I was always paying attention more to the human, that the body, of course, but more to the human inside the body.
I love it, mate. Thanks for sharing. Something I picked up then, and I think this sort of leads into the listeners going, right, oh, here's some gold for me now. You said back when you kicked this stuff off, or when these gyms sort of started, no one really knew what they were doing. Now, if I think about a lot of managers I coach one-to-one, particularly the new ones, they're like, fuck, what am I supposed to do? Like, what do I do? And people get a bit confused with all that. Why is it not a bad thing to sit there and not know what the answers are straight away? How does that help people to then progress and grow by not knowing exactly what to do?
A million ways. Well, one, we grow in discomfort. You don't grow when you're comfortable. You're not learning when you're comfortable generally. And also there's a big difference between I'm going to tell you something, Mark, I'm going to recount some story versus you're going to go through an experience. Because when you have the experience, good, bad, or indifferent, you are literally developing insight, awareness, skill, resilience, so that you are becoming more adaptable and capable in the middle of the stuff that's out of our control quite often. So I was already running people's gyms or managing, but there was a limited role. I didn't do everything, of course. There were accountants and lots of other moving parts. But when you have your own gym, like I opened my own standalone facility at 26, I was so underprepared and so unqualified and so inept that it was good that I was so ignorant, because if I had have known what I didn't know, I would have been too scared to do it.
Yep.
But I learned, you sink or swim. And, you think about the very idea of training and working out, like we call it progressive resistance overload or resistance training. And the idea is that we work against resistance in the gym, and there's a biological byproduct, which is adaptation. And the adaptation of working against resistance is growth, is strength, is improvement. And so too, psychologically and emotionally, when we work against resistance, be that fear or be that some kind of hate or pessimism or self-doubt or whatever it is, we develop and we accelerate our growth and our development. And not everyone, of course, but there's a percentage of people in 2021 who want the results without the work. They want the destination without the journey. And good luck with that. You can't get strong without lifting, and you can't get good at what you're not doing, and you can't master what you avoid. And so I'm all for calculated suffering.
Yeah, love it. Calculated suffering. I've not heard that term before. So some advice for managers who feel like they just have to know it all, which I think's bullshit in itself. And having been one myself, and as a young manager, mate, I was bad, Mark, who had to know everything and would do anything he could to be the smartest prick in the room. What would you tell people when they have those moments of, oh shit, I don't know it all now and I'm in a bit of trouble? What advice would you give to that sort of manager?
I'd say, I don't know. That's what I'd do. I'll go, I don't know, but I'll find out. I'll do some research. I'll get back to you. I used to work in radio, and I'd often get asked questions on radio that weren't really in my wheelhouse because it was talkback radio, so everyone would ring up with questions. And they'd quite often ask me a medical question, like, oh, Craig, there's clicking in my knee when I do this or that. I'm an exercise scientist, right? But it's not my job to diagnose injuries over the phone. And two, I'm not qualified. And people would ask me stuff and I go, mate, I don't know. Got no idea. Go see a doctor. Thanks for your call. And I think it's okay. It's okay not knowing. Like, it's an unnecessary emotional burden that we put on ourselves to be all-knowing and always to be right. It's so liberating to, one, be wrong, and I'm wrong often, and to admit that you're wrong and to say, I don't know. And that compulsion to feel like you have to know is, for me anyway, it's fear, it's insecurity, and it's ego. And I think, so me as a teacher and a coach and a mentor these days, the more completely authentic I am with people about what I know and don't know, what I'm good at and bad at, the more of a connection and the more trust. But when I try to present myself as all-knowing, they know I'm full of shit because I'm not. I'm not all-knowing. I'm still fucking up and I'm 57 and figuring shit out.
Yeah.
I've got my old plates on. I'm doing a PhD heading towards the 2-year mark. I still feel like a fraud. I still feel like the dumbest person at Monash University. But I'm there. I know I'm not, but that feeling's ever present.
Yeah. Rightness. I think it's a social and corporate disease. It's like this need to be right. I often talk to people about why do you need to be right? And I think there's a whole lot of things that go on there. One of them in particular is just that I just need to feel like I'm accepted, particularly if we're talking in the corporate world. Geez, I better not be wrong, or I better not be 1% out on my numbers, or I'll get my ass kicked for the next 3 months till the next quarterly review. What's your advice, mate, for humans to not get caught up in their rightness? What can they do in a moment of time to address that need to be, I've got the facts, these are the facts, this is the answer, and maybe just sit there and just listen to others?
Yeah. Okay, so one, it's great to be humble because humble's kind of sexy and appealing, and not to be humble for that reason. But, if you truly are a humble person, people are more likely to listen to you and engage and pay attention and respect you versus being arrogant and self-righteous and seemingly all-knowing. So that's the obvious stuff. But on a deeper psychological level, if I can open that door, because you've actually opened a big door, right? And so the reason a lot of people want to be right, Mark, in my opinion, is because they get their sense of self and identity and self-worth from that fact, right? I know that my religion is the right religion and that everyone who doesn't think like me or believe like me is wrong. And by the way, this is not about religion. This is about belief or thinking, right? So the problem is when I've lived around a certain ideology, whether that ideology or philosophy is around food or exercise or religion or spirituality or some other construct, when my life has been revolving around a certain ideology for a very long time now, that ideology and I are one and the same. So if you question that thinking or you question that belief that I have, one, you're questioning me. And two, the thought of me being wrong and you being right is too overwhelming. So now I hate you and now we're enemies. So this is one of the problems. One of the questions I ask audiences often when we're actually in front of real humans in real rooms is, put up your hand if you think you're objective and open-minded. And of course, everyone puts up their hand because we love that thought. I want to be objective and open-minded because I'm awesome. And then I go, well, you're all wrong because none of you are, including me. And I wish I was, but I'm not. And then I talk about why, and we talk about the subjective nature of being human and not being totally objective. You can be more or less objective, of course, but not being totally objective is not a flaw. It's part of being human. And the reason is we look at everything that happens in the world around us. In our physical 3-dimensional world, we process that through our own window. And our window is our beliefs and our values and our standards and our experiences and our ideas and our faith and our belief system and all of those things. So because Craig Harper has pre-existing ideas and values and beliefs and drivers and all of these things, Craig Harper can't be a blank canvas because he's already been painted.
Yeah.
Right? So the beginning of real awareness, now I know this is a tangent, but maybe you're interested. The beginning of real awareness and real open-mindedness is to recognize my lack of awareness and open-mindedness and acknowledge it and go, I know that I'm not objective, but I also know I'm brave enough to go, I know I could be wrong about some things that I really believe are right. I know I could be wrong. Makes me uncomfortable, but, and I've been wrong. Mate, I used to, for 20 years, I taught people about the food pyramid because it was science. And then one day I found out, not one day, but kind of, that's actually really flawed science. And then you kind of go, okay, hey, everyone, for the last 20 years, I've been wrong. I thought I was right, but I wasn't right. Sorry. So here's what I now know. This seems to be a lot better science. Now I'm going to share this. And happily put up my hand and go, fucked up. Didn't want to, didn't try to lead you astray. I was operating with integrity, but was I wrong? Completely wrong. The end.
As you were speaking then, a mental note in my head was around the mirror and the ability for human beings to turn the mirror onto themselves. Because a very easy thing to do, as we all go, is like, if this podcast doesn't go well, it's because Craig Harper doesn't fucking know what he's talking about. That would be easy for me to do that. But I could sit here going, geez, I got a bit overwhelmed today because I listened to this guy's podcast and he's famous. I had a little bit of that beforehand. I'm like, shit, he's going to actually talk to me, this guy. How do you, your own self, help to get yourself to look back into your own mirror? And what have you learnt about Craig Harper over the years that's tried to get you to turn your mirror outwards, and how do you fight that?
If I'm understanding the question, tell me if I head in the wrong direction. But I started to become aware of my bullshit, of which there is much. There's less now, but there's still enough. But when I started to realize that, okay, so all of the things that I thought were success, or a lot of them, I now have. I had multiple businesses. I had lots of people working for me. I didn't just have 4 gyms. I had another business or 2. At one stage, I had 5 different locations of businesses. I had, at any given time, more than 100 people working for me. I was making lots of dough. I had a nice house. I had a nice beach house. I had lots of stuff. And everyone thought I was killing it. And I was writing for the Herald Sun in Melbourne, and I was ticking all these success boxes. And in the middle of all of that stuff, that box ticking and that, T crossing and I dotting, and, I wouldn't say I was wildly unhappy, but I wasn't happy. My default setting was somewhere between not real happy and anxious. And yep. I didn't sleep well. I was living out of alignment. I was eating shit I shouldn't have eaten because I was just really busy, but that was kind of bullshit too. And I just started to question my whole success paradigm, because I grew up in a program. Everyone grows up in a program. And my program taught me that, Craig, success is about things. Success is about money and brand and business and profile and house and car. And success is about all the stuff that people can see. Whereas I truly believe now that for us living in first world comfort, not everyone, of course, but let's say we've got a place to live and a car and food, and we're not in poverty. And for those people who are really, really doing it hard, what I'm about to say is not the case, although they overlap. For me, I believe that success is about what's happening internally.
Yep.
And for me, success is an inside-out process, not an outside-in. Also, of course, nothing wrong with owning a great company, getting paid big bucks, driving a Lamborghini, whatever you want. But don't confuse what you have with who you are. And for me, I got my sense of self and self-esteem and identity from my stuff and my things and my accolades and what people thought of me, because I was wildly insecure, because I was still the fat kid when I was 25 and 30. And also then talking to people and going, oh, you feel that too?
Yeah.
Oh, you're like, I love hugging men, right? And going, mate, it's okay. I know you're insecure. I know you're overthinking. I know in this moment even, I'm not talking about you, Mark, but sometimes I'll sit in front of a guy and he'll spend the first 10 minutes trying to impress me, and I know what's going on. I'm like, you don't need to do that. I like you. You're good enough. And by the way, just because I've got a little bit of a profile and you don't, I'm not on any level better than you. And this is not me being humbled. It's the truth.
Yep.
We're just in a different place.
Yeah, I think you've answered that question really well. I think this idea of self, like it does start with what's inside. And there's so much, I think a lot of people, they talk about this, I've got to turn up as corporate Mark. And then when I go somewhere else, I'll be a different Mark. And we do play different roles, granted, husband, partner, whatever, parent and all that sort of stuff. But, this idea that we've got to be different people when we turn up to different places. And I think that takes a shitload of energy. Were you 2 different sorts of people at that stage, with the sort of the outward Craig, the successful guy that, writing in the Herald Sun and all that sort of stuff? And then there was this other, you've talked about self-loathing a lot at different times, I've heard. How do you help people to deal with not thinking like they have to be different when they turn up into different places? Because it takes a lot of energy.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to exercise a lot of discretion and self-awareness and situational awareness and emotional intelligence. So there are things that I wouldn't say on a podcast, but nothing that's a deep, dark secret. Like pretty much I'm an open book, but just things that probably wouldn't add any value. But there are similar models to what I'm about to share, but I talk about these 4 components or almost expressions of who we are. And so there's like public me, then there's personal me, then there's private me, and then there's secret me. And public me is me right now. And also I try to bring personal me into public settings because I'm more authentic. So typically what it would be for people in my experience is public me is what you see in public. And that sometimes that can be persona, not person.
Yep.
Right? The show. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but it's like when I go and do a corporate gig, I have a certain kind of energy because you know the drill. I've got to get up and the lights on, mic's on, and you got 1 hour, be interesting, be amusing, be a bit funny, tell great stories, inspire them a bit, and then fuck off. All right. So, you've got to be in a certain place. You can't warm up, right? So there's that. But then there's if I'm doing a podcast or you and I are having a coffee, I talk the same. My energy's the same. The messages there's no special. And for me, I do a lot. This is my second podcast today. I did one with a girl called Lisa Tamati, who you would love. She's from New Zealand this morning, and then I've got one of my own later today. I mean, if I couldn't do this and be completely authentic, real and relaxed, I'd be exhausted if I had to turn on some special fucking persona every time, right? And it's just, well, people get it too. They go, well, that's bullshit. Nobody's like that all the time. So why do that? So there's public you, personal you. Personal you is, family and friends. Private you is 1 or 2 people in your world, and secret you, only you get to know that person.
Yep.
And so for me, it's how do I show up? Like I had to do a gig on Monday night and I wrote about this on social media because it was just fascinating in this very room I'm sitting in now. Yeah, for Hewlett-Packard in Spain. Well, the booking was from Spain and I had a meeting with them. So I assumed erroneously that I was talking to people in Spain. But about 90 seconds before I went live, the lady said to me, no, you're speaking to people in 38 different countries. And I'm like, oh, fuckity fuck, Batman. So I'm sitting, like, mate, I'm sitting in my studio at home, like my chicken and rice is on the bench 10 feet away in the kitchen, ready to be heated up, right? And it's 5:30, and you literally find out 90 seconds before. You're not talking to a group in a room or at one, whatever. You're talking to people in 38 different, hundreds of people around the world. I'm like, oh, okay. But what was amazing was obviously, because there's a lot of people from a lot of non-English speaking countries who speak English, by the way, but for a lot of them, English is not their first language. So I just became more, well, don't say fuck because this is a big corporate gig. Don't say that, Harps. That's probably wise. But also maybe talk a little bit slower than normal.
Yeah.
Right? But I still Craigified everything and I didn't water anything down. And, I got really, really nice feedback. And apart from that, I also, the other thing to come out of that was I was just thinking, how amazing is it that, like, I did my first paid speaking gig when I was 24 and it was to a bunch of blokes in a timber yard and I was shit and I got paid $50 and they couldn't fucking wait for me to finish because I was terrible, right? Well, that was 33 years ago. Imagine if 24-year-old Craig thought, in a few decades, you're going to be sitting in this room in your house and you're going to be talking to this gizmo that looks kind of like a small television with buttons on it. And there's going to be people from all around the world looking at you and you can see them and there's screens and screens of them and you can scroll and they can talk to you in real time. They can turn on a microphone or they can type you messages and you're going to get paid more for that than you currently do for a month, right? And then you're going to finish that, walk out to the kitchen, make a cup of tea and check your messages. It's just, we are so blessed. Like what we have is so incredible. Like for me, I'm the most grateful dude ever. Like my work is not work. I never have that sense of I've got a job. I feel My overwhelming feeling around the stuff I do is almost guilt.
Yeah. Funny, I responded to your LinkedIn note with a couple of little diagrams, one of a pig and one of a shit.
Oh, that's right, I saw.
Because you know what? Even as I was reading that, and I'm thinking to myself, he would have been rolling around like a pig in shit, because the thing of not knowing and the surprise that comes with that, and back to your point about the being blessed or guilty, I'm a little bit the same. I actually don't feel like I work. And sometimes you go, what about the poor bastards that do feel like they work? But I can't control what they're thinking. Back to this other thing, though. This moment where you realise there was 38 countries, and my sense would be you would have had a little smirk on your face and gone, let's go and do this. Now, someone else would have gone, holy fuck.
Yeah.
How can people get out of the holy fuck moment? Because this happens in the workplace. Hey, you need to step up for your boss and present today. What's your advice around getting people in that moment to find another way to embrace it rather than be shit frightened of it?
Look, a form of that question I've been asked many times, and the question is essentially, how do I overcome my fear of public speaking? And the answer is by public speaking.
Yep.
So I'm going to go, I can't tell you something that's going to take away your fear instantly. I can't tell you that. Maybe that exists, but I don't know what it is. What I can tell you is that you can't get good at speaking by avoiding it. You can't build confidence by running the other way. You can't build strength and resilience and awareness and understanding and in the moment skill. You can't do that if every time you get asked to do something that scares you a bit or is hard a bit, that you run the other way. My next question is, do you want to be mentally and emotionally tougher? Do you want to build resilience and competency and strength? And everyone goes, yeah, I do. I go, well, get up and be fucking scared and shut up. Yep. Like, be scared. I've been scared my whole life, because my whole life I've felt like a fraud. My whole life. I got asked the other day, what's your superpower? I'm like, well, one, I don't have a superpower at all. I have some skills, but just through effort and work. But what surprisingly, if I'd say what was my super gift, I'm going to say my super gift was the fact that I was so mediocre that I just had to work harder than all of my talented friends.
Yep.
Because shit came so easy to them. You know, they could run fast, jump high, get girls, pass exams, whatever, all of it. You know, for me, it's like, fuck, and how do you do that? You know, I remember going for when most 14-year-olds could run out the door and run 5Ks without elevating their heart rate too much. Well, back in my day, they could. But I couldn't run 200 meters because I was morbidly obese. You know, I had no athletic skills. I was an average student, you know, but you become a good student by first being shit. It's like, I love martial arts. I love the philosophy of true Eastern, humble student, teacher, master martial arts. And in that philosophy, you start as a white belt, and nobody starts at any other color. And you can't become a black belt without doing lots of hard work and getting punched in the face.
Yeah.
You know, this is what you do. You get punched in the face, or you get submitted, or you get choked, or you get thrown, or you get injured, but along the way, you go through this process that changes who you are and how well you can deal with shit. And it's a beautiful analogy. The dojo is a beautiful analogy to the world, because we think we've got to change our life, but really we've got to change ourselves in the middle of that life.
Yeah, and I like that idea of, I guess, metaphorically getting punched in the face, is that they're the things that will make us stronger. We tend, again, I sort of talk about the workplace here now, having been in corporate for 25 years, you're actually trying to duck and actually not get in the ring, because it's safer to not be in the ring, but then you don't grow. 14-year-old Craig, I'm going to say, undertook an experiment. One day he went for a run and he experimented with some other things. And I see life as a series of multiple experiments being run in conjunction at times as well. My question to you is this: if you can share this, what's an experiment that Craig's going through at the moment? What are you experimenting with about yourself to become something different or better, or whatever you want to call it?
I'm experimenting with my brain and my mind, and I'm experimenting with getting better when you're not meant to get better. there's an inevitability of aging, of course. Chronologically, we're all getting older every day. But there's another much bigger and more important and controllable component to aging, and that is how we manage what we have, how I manage my psychology, my emotion, my physiology, my nervous system, the biochemicals in my brain with what I do, my nutrition, my sleep, my hydration, my social habits, my lifestyle. So what we know is that, and it's not about acting your age. It's not about pretending you're younger. It's not about putting your head in the sand about aging. It's not that at all. It's recognizing that there are some people that are 50 and they have friends that are 50, and they might even have similar potential and resources and genetics, but those people, because of their behavior, are totally different on a functional level. So I'm 57. I don't drink. I don't smoke. And I'm not advocating anything here. I'm just telling people my story. So I've never been drunk. I've never had a glass of alcohol. I've never smoked. I've never done recreational drugs. I don't eat shit. I did for a while. I don't eat shit. I sleep great. Everything that I can do to manage my mind and my immune system and, my heart and my soul and my energy, I try to do that, or I do that pretty much optimally.
Yep.
And so one of the byproducts of that is my mind works better now than when I was 30. Like better, not as well as better.
Yep.
So my recall, my retention, my ability to communicate and articulate and think and create and produce and learn is better than it used to be. Now, that shouldn't happen in inverted commas, but it can happen. So I love teaching people about their own potential. Get out of that story, because the limitation for most of us is the story. Oh, well, you're at this age, or you have these genetics, or you're in this situation, so you are severely limited. And these that are, well, maybe. And like I said, we're not pretending that age doesn't happen or there's not biological deterioration. Of course there is. But the thing is that the last time I had a biological age done, which was it was probably 2 years ago now, but so what was I, 55? But my bio age was 38, which is 17 years younger than I was at the time. And I don't even have great genetics. And that's not a boast. That's just the data. So What we know is we can actually really, really control our cellular health upwards, right through to cognitive level and cognitive function and choices and behaviors and outcomes in a really strategic way. Whereas I think a lot of us just kind of do a lot of life unconsciously when it comes to managing our body.
And then there's the hard work that's got to be done. And I guess what I call the skillful art of work avoidance, our ability to avoid that work because there's something else that's more important or potentially easier to do. One last question and then get some details on where people can find you. I call this podcast a Simply Practically Human podcast because I have this issue around how human beings seem to try and turn simple shit into really complex shit at times. And that's notwithstanding that we are complex beings. But I'm talking about work and things like that. Like, let's try and simplify things rather than make them complex. Why do you think humans get romanced by the flame of complexity when sometimes the answers are just simply there in front of them, if you do think that?
Do we complicate stuff? Well, I think we end up complicating stuff because sometimes to complicate it makes it easier for ourselves, right? So Mark and I have an issue and Mark pissed me off. Or maybe I pissed myself off by telling myself a story about what I thought Mark was saying or doing, right? So the simplest and most effective way to deal with that is say, hey, mate, can I talk to you?
Yep.
You said this and I responded like that. Did you mean, and then, okay, then it's done. Then you go, no, mate, I didn't mean that. Okay, so that's simple. That's one-to-one. But instead of doing that, because I don't like confrontation, now I tell Sally about it. I tell Sally and Sally jumps on board and goes, yeah, Mark does do that. And then someone else jumps in and goes, no, I don't reckon Mark does. Now I'm talking to 7 people about it. Then I go home, get in bed, talk to my wife about it. And then now she hates Mark as well because he's being thought, and then I think about it. And then now I'm coming up to work in the elevator. And before I even get on the floor where Mark and I both work, I'm now anxious and overthinking because I've created this whole fucking complicated thing that doesn't actually exist.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes things become complicated because we don't want to do the simple but hard thing. See, people think like simple is easy. Sometimes simple is hard as fuck, right? So how do you run up a mountain? Well, 1 foot after the other. It's not complicated, but it's hard, right? It's you just run, dude. You start running and keep running. Well, that's easier said than done. Of course, literally everything is easier said than done. So I think we complicate things sometimes when we try to, like I always say to one of my friends, when he explains stuff to me, if this is my geographic analogy, he goes from Melbourne, where I am, to Sydney via Kuala Lumpur.
Yeah.
I'm like, verbally, I'm like, dude, just say what you want to say. Because you tell me a 1 minute thing in 26 minutes and I don't have the time and you're making it hard. So, you still be wise and sympathetic and empathetic, but I think being direct and taking the sometimes the path of most resistance, sometimes the narrow path, sometimes that's the best path.
I agree with that. And I think, this idea of, again, back to work avoidance, just stepping away from it, I think we should step into it. And again, the word that comes to mind for me there, Craig, is intention. Our intention with that conversation is to make progress and not to make someone feel like they're shit. Let's finish up with where the listeners can find out because I know your podcast, you have about 10,000 listens a day on your podcast now. That's right, isn't it?
We're up around that. Yeah, we're heading.
Bloody hell.
Last week, our stats were about just under 9.6 or something. So it's good. We're going great.
So where do people find out about, where can they, is there a website or where do they go to listen to your podcast or find out more about what you do?
So you can just go to the app on your phone, I guess, whatever phone you'll have a podcast app and just do a search on The You Project and go to my website. There's lots of stuff on there, which is just craigharper1word.net. You can go to Whiteboard Lessons on Instagram and I'll probably hurt your feelings at some stage. Just follow me on there. You can follow me on Facebook, LinkedIn. You can come to my house, come over, just knock on the door. We'll have a donut and some Coke and all good, mate. So there's a bunch of places, but if worse comes to worse, just type my name into a search engine and either me or a British singer will come up.
Hey, Craig, thanks for coming on, mate. I appreciate your openness and what you've been prepared to share, and I'm sure the listeners are going to get a shitload out of it. So thanks again, mate.
Thanks, Mark. Good luck with everything. Well, there we go, team. Another co-share, we call that in the biz, a co-share between Mark and I. I hope you got something out of it. I hope you have a ripper day. Love your guts. Just love, I love your guts. See ya.